We're going to do a thank you, Dinah, for starting the recording. We're here to talk about the test series that you're using, the test blueprints and assembled test items that are here. We won't have a lot of time to explore them, but I do want to look at a couple of examples. And in that context, then that when we're looking at the test results on the individual skills profile, we know the what behind the how we're going to interpret it. And then looking at some of the student data in reports. And I understand that you want to focus on the individual skills profile today, so that's what I'll be doing. I will be introducing you to a couple of other reports that are available, but we won't analyze that today. And then, of course, I always like to wrap up with what are some resources that are available to you as we walk away from today, and things like our office hours and news and updates. So first of all, this is my name, Kristine Kruchek-Maines. And if you can guess my family heritage, both sets of my grandparents on both sides of my families were English language learners. They came from Germany and Ireland and Poland, and Pennsylvania Dutch. So you can imagine what I'm nice, what we call, I'm a mutt, right? I have lots of background with immigration in my family. And that's why I have such a passion, because our ESL programs give our individuals that we're working with an opportunity to transition into adult basic ed training programs that give them opportunity, just like my grandparents had. So I want to take a minute just to get a pulse, what we call a temperature check. And if you can look at these book titles, what best represents your tutoring experience so far? You can interpret these however you like. A Court of Thorns and Roses, that would be A. B, how come no one told me that? B, Love You Forever. C, or Brave New World. You're brand new to tutoring. And again, you can interpret this however you want. You might be teaching a new content. You may have worked with younger students, but never older students. So what would your book title be that best represents your specific tutoring experience? And we're just going to fly those through the chat so that I can get a sense of where you all are at. Just post in the chat. We're not doing a fancy poll today. Keeping it easy. Nice. Love You Forever. Somebody loves tutoring. Looks like we've got a nice mix so far. Thank you for posting your answers in the chat. I see a couple more coming in. Great. So we've got some of you who love tutoring. I'm assuming that that's some
Yes, I have
experience.
it now. Thank you.
Yes. And D, I see some of that. Nice. And also I see some B's as well. How come but nobody told me that? Well, hopefully today we'll be covering some of the things that you didn't know. This is actually what some of the CASAS sample test items look like for our ELL students. There's a pictorial representation and a simple answer. So we want to make sure that our students know that we have them in mind. So thank you so much. It looks like we can move on. I think we've got the rest of our answers done. All right, I have a sense of who's in the room. I just want to do a brief overview of this test series that you're using. I'm not going to go in depth a lot, but I do want to review some big ideas. I met with Dinah. It's Dinah, right? Not Dina. Dinah.
That's correct.
I have a friend, Dina, who spells her name just like yours, so I have to stop myself. So Dinah and Lori and I have talked about just a brief review of the test series you're using. Some of you are new to tutoring. Some of you may have not seen the test series yet. So I wanted to just make sure for all experiences that we're all on the same page. The test series is steps and goals. We'll look at those in a minute. There are 5 test levels. Those 5 test levels start at A, at the lowest level, and E, the highest level. This is not applicable to you guys in Michigan, so just ignore that one. They are aligned to what we call the ELPs, or the English Language Proficiency Standards. If you are familiar with the ELPs, the English Language Proficiency Standards, you will know that those came from the College and Career Readiness Standards. So the College and Career Readiness Standards were a national study that said, what do people need to know and be able to do to meet the demands of the changing workforce? They are highly rigorous with an academic focus for workplace and life skills literacy. So they're very different than what we would traditionally think of the subjects that, like, I studied, right, in reading and math. We read stories and then we did math computation. But the ELP standards and the college and career readiness standards focus on work and life contexts. Any questions about that? We'll dig into that a little bit more. So if you would post in the chat, if you have a report of one of your students, an individual skills profile report, just say, yep, got one, or nope, don't have it. Just a yes or a no in the chat. Because I want to show you some of the new reports. So it looks like I think everybody has them. Fantastic. All right, that's great. I want to make sure that I can make this relevant to the report that you have. So let's look at the levels to understand what we need to teach. So we have to understand the what to understand how, and we have to understand the why and the what to understand how. Let's look at the level breakdowns: A, B, C, D, and E. One of the things that makes the test series that you're working with unique is that these levels directly align or correlate to levels 1 and 2 with the NRS level. Now, what does that mean? That's just the level of functional skills that the student knows and is able to do, from the lowest level to the highest level. This is how the federal government and the National Reporting Services measures how a student is making a gain. So the beauty of the test series you're using is that if a student pre-tested at level 1, even though they may be at the lowest level, they have an opportunity to make what's called an MSG. What's an MSG? I'll post in the chat. It's a measurable skills gain. Just give me a raised hand or a thumbs up if you've heard this term before. Measurable skills gain. If you've thumbs up, yep. Have not heard of it before, some of you, great. If you have heard of it, you will know that this is how we measure students' growth. Thank you, Jill, for posting in the chat. The measurable skills gain is what we want. And I'm going to be talking today about how to show and look at our data that we have from our student to support our students' growth. How do we know what to focus on? How do we know how to help students make a gain? Got it? All right, let's keep going. STEPS stands for the Student's Test of English Progress and Success. There's a reading and listening assessment, and there are 5 levels. This is what's approved for your ESL program, English as a Second Language programs. So those are our non-native speakers. Everybody got that? Okay, perfect. The NRS, or the National Reporting Service, has approved reading steps and listening steps through 2030. Why is this important? This means that you can support your students over time for several years, especially our English language learners, right? They need not just a month or two, right? They will need a significant amount of support. So you won't have to change how you measure what they're doing and their growth. You won't have to change the test. That's all that means. Now, The CASAS steps is designed around what we call the ELPs, as I mentioned. So let's dig a little deeper. On a scale of 1 to 5, post in the chat, please. For those of you who are teaching ELL students or English language learners, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being new to me, 5 being I dream about them and I can name them off the top of my head. I can't even do that. Where are you on the scale of understanding the English language proficiency standards? Thank you for posting in the chat. I see a few people. We've got 40 people in the room, so thank you for flooding the chat. So it looks like we've got a few people who are somewhere in the middle. Great. And some who are brand new to the English language proficiency standards. What I like to do is actually the link when you get this PowerPoint, I'll send it to Laurie and Dinah. They will have this and you'll be able to dig deeper into the English language proficiency standards. But essentially, it looks like we've got most people who are new, and that's okay. The English language proficiency standards are the standards that we use to guide instruction. The English language proficiency standards, or let's call them ELPs from now on, trying to model good teaching, right? Vocabulary development. ELPs are the standards that we look at and say, is the student able to do this or not? Is this their strength or is this a weakness that we need to support instruction through? Moving to the ABE assessments, it's called goals or goals 2. There are 5 levels in the new goals 2 series. They're for both math and reading. The math goals 2 is approved again through 2030. The reading goals that you're currently using will change over in the new program year to reading goals 2. And that is in the process of the final stages of being approved by the federal government. We just have to wait for that Titanic to turn around, right? They have to post all of that change. So reading goals will become reading goals 2 and math goals 2. These are also designed with the CCRS in mind. Now, what's the CCRS? That's the College and Career Readiness Standards. So for ABE students, our adult students who are native English speakers, we use the College and Career Readiness Standards to guide our instruction. These are links to the test series, the College and Career Readiness Standards, just in the chat, again, on that scale of 1 to 5, how familiar you are with the College and Career Readiness Standards. 1 being never heard of them before, 5 being I'm on it, or 3, somewhere in between. Okay, great. So you will have some homework. Dinah and Laurie and I talked about yesterday. You'll have a little bit of homework and some follow-up training to this. We're not going to go in depth on the ELPs or the College and Career Readiness Standards today, but the CCRS are the College and Career Readiness Standards. I'm typing it in the chat for anybody who wants to grab that if you're making notes. Those help specifically for our students to figure out what their strengths are and look at their goals and say, I need to know how to do this, and that's not my strength, and that's where I need to work. And you as tutors will say, that's not their strength. We'll help them build skills and knowledge in that specific standard to help them reach their outcomes. The NRS is the National Reporting Services, and the NRS is part of the agency, federal agency that tracks student growth and progress, which is tied to the funding that you have for this program. So the NRS is the National Reporting Services. They're a federal agency that collects data and reports what students are doing in both ABE programs, our adult students who are native speakers, as well as our English language learners, our non-native English speakers. Does that help? Okay, great. Thank you for asking the question, Ann Albertus. Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it. All right, so the NRS is the National Reporting Services. You don't have to worry about it because that's something that's done at the agency or state level. But you do need to know that your teaching and tutoring directly informs our students' growth, and focusing on those college and career readiness standards helps our students meet their objectives and goals, right? That's our role. All right. So I want to just have a little exercise. CASAS not only includes those competencies and standards, but our test items also include CASAS task areas. Now, why this is important is if you look at the task areas, things like general tasks that we do with work or picture prompts, there are forms, as you can see, like a profile, fitness profile that someone might fill out, or in a job, if they're responsible for helping a new person come into, let's say, the recreational center or a workout place, they would need to understand how to apply standards like key details to a form or a chart. This is a table, a receipt. There are also diagrams and things like emails. So all of the CASAS tests that you're using, and why this is important, layer academic foundations, college and career readiness standards, or English language proficiency standards, right? CASAS competencies that are about work and life, and a task type. So why would that be important as a teacher? For me, if I know that my student is needing to work on key details, and we're going to look at an example, and understanding what the key details are, or locating key details, and that standard is what they need to work on, I would also see in their individual skills profile the task types. So I could get, some of you may be old enough to remember the double mint twins, right? 2 for the price of 1. There were 2 twins that had 2 pieces of gum. And if you think of the test items as being able to teach 2 types of instructional activities. So you could teach the standard of key details with a strength of the student, which may have been, let's say, charts, tables, and graphs, and they will learn that standard key details faster because we're presenting it to them through the task type of a chart, table, or graph that they've already shown that is one of their strengths. Make sense? On the flip side, if a student needs to work on key details, but we are assigning it and we have a lesson that is a task type or a type of task that is not their strength, it's going to be harder for that student to acquire that skill, right? So we call that scaffolding in teaching, right? We scaffold or layer on a strength skill, a strength, which is perhaps a task type, and the standard where they need to grow. And then that way they can get that standard and acquire competency faster, right? We've all had this personal experience, haven't we? We know part of something, but not all of it. Make sense? So if we know part of something, we can build on those blocks of understanding to learn faster. Any questions about that concept? You've all experienced that in your own lives. I'm sure you can think of a time right now, right, where you did something and you didn't quite know all of it, but you'd had an experience with this thing over here and it helped you learn the other part, right? Okay. If you look at this, these are some examples of the task types. You can revisit this as we look deeper at the item types. So just to sum it up, what's the big idea here? Each test series that we have includes content standards, and I'll give you some virtual chocolate or virtual whatever you like, piece of cake, donut, potato chips. I'm a salt person, not a sweet person. Here's a virtual gift for the first person who can type what type of standards do we teach the English language learners? What are they called? You can put the acronym or you can write out the whole thing. What was the acronym or the name? ELPs. Great, Helena. Here's your chocolate or whatever your sweet thing is that you like. Now, what content standards do we use to focus instruction for our native speakers, our adult basic education students? What are the standards that we use? Not the ELPs, but the other one that we use for our adult basic education. Great, thank you. So the standards are layered into our tests. The competencies, the CASAS competencies are layered into our tests. Those are work and life competencies, which we're not going to get in depth in those today. And task and item types. Yes, Mary, college and career readiness, very important. So the ELPs, great. And the CCRS for ABE. And the CASAS competencies, those are 360 essential life skills. Well, we can't teach all 360, can we? But when we look at our report, we can pick one to focus on, and that's what we're going to do next. And again, just as a review, the tasks are the way the test item and the display, what it looks like in the reading and math or reading and listening. That is what they look like so that the student can apply the standard or the skill that they're practicing and the skill that they're working on to a specific type of task. The task types look like they all relate only to reading, not listening. There are more in-depth, there are listening types. That's why it says item types here. So there are item types, and actually, if you look, great question, it's just not on this slide. The item types are used to categorize the type of prompts. You were anticipating, Linda. Great job. The item types are used to, those are the types of prompts for the listening items. That's a great question. So the type of task applies to reading and math, but the item type applies to the listening items for our ELL students. And what part is used to help with speaking improvement? Nice. So both listening and the CASAS competencies, as well as the content standards, also all have speaking components and listening components in them. So there are standards for speaking, the oral communications, speaking in a group. There are competencies like speaking in a team. There are lots of those. We won't have time to go in depth, but Teresa, if you want to email me, I can send you a couple links that we can go deeper into that. All right, big idea. These are all layered in the items. Okay, let's take a minute to breathe because I want to get into the reports. Take just a moment. You can type in the chat. Take a minute to reflect. Here's one of our beautiful lakes. I used to think, but now I think. This is a thinking and reflection routine you can use in your classroom. 1 minute. So after we finish a section of learning, this is one really great strategy. We know that research says reflection is important. So let's take a minute. I used to think, now I think. You can write it down, and if you want to leave that a private reflection, that's perfectly fine. If you would like to share it in the chat, please post it in the chat. Fill in the blanks. Setting my timer. Fifteen seconds left. Anyone else want to share? It's okay if you just keep it to yourself. That's our 1 minute timer. Isn't it amazing how 1 minute feels like an eternity when we're reflecting? Our students will experience that same potentially discomfort. So we want to set up that it's okay to share or not to share, but we definitely want them to reflect on their learning. Thanks, Teresa. Appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Let's look at the test blueprints and sample items very quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Are the CCRS easier than the ELPs? No, they're just different. Their CCRS are targeted toward adult learners who are native speaking English speakers, and the ELPs are focused on English language learners who have a different set of needs when it comes to the standards and competencies that they need to demonstrate. So neither's easier or harder. It's kind of like some people like Coke, some people like Pepsi, right? Coke is appropriate for some people, Pepsi's for the others. Okay, I want to let you know that there are sample test items and an e-test sampler. Has anyone seen this? If you have not, please know you can at any time use the CASAS e-test sampler to look deeper at the test item types. So if you want to dig deeper into looking at the different types of items, you can do so. There are also sample test items and blueprints. What's a blueprint? Anyone can just post in the chat. And if you have any requests, yep, outline, roadmap, diagram, overview, perfect. All of the test series have blueprints and they are all available online. So I would encourage you to go look at the sample test items and see the alignment to standards, to the standards. I'm going to pause my share for just a quick second. I want to look at for just a minute the sample test items. This is a reading steps example. Reading steps focuses on those ELP standards as we talked about. I just want to take a minute to digest this blueprint or that how it's designed or the layout. Can everybody see this okay? Okay, thanks. I appreciate that head nods and that helps a lot. Level A, lowest or highest level? Lowest level. As we can see, English language learners need a significant amount of vocabulary, photos, symbols. We call those high frequency words. Those are all picture prompts, right? Kind of like what we did at the very beginning when we looked at the pictures of the books. That would be considered a picture prompt. And then the students would answer the question. So here's a high frequency words, high frequency vocabulary without pictures but text, like the word one would be for numbers. And as we can see, 43 plus 15 plus 15. Now, I'm not really great at math. It's not my strength. But if I guesstimate 45, 15, and 15, that is almost 80% of the questions, right? Did I do my math right? 80% of the questions are high frequency vocabulary words, high frequency vocabulary in text, pictures, text, and numbers, money, number words, time, number formatting. At the lowest level, our primary instruction, almost 80% of our time should be focused then on what? Here's the trick. I'll give you a hint. At the lowest level, 80% then of our instruction would be focused on
high frequency words.
High frequency words, including those high frequency numbers, right? Vocabularies. Excellent. Thank you for answering the question. So if we are trying to decompose or work on teaching text, heavy text, large passages, we're going to lose our students, aren't we? We want to make sure that we're focusing on the high frequency words based on their test results. So at level 1, they're relying heavily on context, recognizing meaning, frequently occurring words, maybe simple phrases, maybe some written text, that short text like about a bus schedule, right? Because they're using those in life, or an experience that they've had personally. Like, let's say there's an event that's going on for their community. They may be able to retell some key details, but our primary focus will be on those vocabulary words, because those vocabulary words help us understand and identify key details, don't they? So I just wanted to give you a sample of what the Reading Steps Content Standard Blueprint looks like. How might you use a blueprint with your own instruction? I'm going to look at the chat. You can post in the chat. How might you use a blueprint when you're thinking about your instruction? Set your goals, help you design what you're teaching. Absolutely. That applies to all. Absolutely. All right. So I want to look at a listening steps example. This is a pictorial prompt at level 1. Thank you, Kimberly and Anne and Mary, for posting in the chat. If you don't have your chat open it up and look and see what your other colleagues are saying. This is an example of the listening steps at NRS. Total guide, and check the content alignment to the standards. Excellent, excellent. This listening steps example, what the student would hear is umbrella, umbrella. And then the student would have to choose which answer is appropriate. Note there's a limited amount of questions or answers, I'm sorry, and one word. Understanding that high frequency word umbrella. Why is it important to know this? Why is it important to know what the test looks like? You can post that in the chat. Why is it important to know what the test looks like? To know what they have to do on the test, right? How they have to perform on the test. And all the other things that you just said before apply the same here, right? To guide your instruction, to understand help them meet their goals, to gear your tutoring with practice that's similar. Excellent. Great. Set them up for success. Absolutely. We've got it. So just to let you know, all the sample test items are on quick links on our homepage. And if you go to the CASAS website after this training, you'll be able to find those quick links for those test series. Here's an activity for you to work together or on your own to explore what you notice and wonder about the different test series, and then how it connects to your responsibilities as a tutor and why it's important to know. We talked a little bit about that. How you're going to use that, that's up to you, but I want to give you a tiny little homework assignment for another time. Okay, Kimberly, which slide do you want me to go to? This one or this one? I'll be providing you with this PDF with the links in them, so you don't have to worry about that. Right, Dinah? We said we would make sure everybody has the links. Yes, thank you, Kimberly. All right.
I'll be following up with everybody afterwards and send out all of these links that you're referring to.
Perfect. So any quick questions about the blueprints or sample test items? I think you all have pretty much shown in the chat, those of you who responded. Okay. If there are any other questions, you can post them in the chat, and then Dinah, you'll let me know. Let's move on to our interpretation. How do we use these reports? First, we have to make an observation. So often we go straight to the analysis, and we want to make sure that we're looking at the evidence and the data first, right? We want to make sure that we look at those reports first and just ask ourselves, what do we see? What do we notice? And what evidence do we have in the report? Not what we think or yet, not what our opinion is yet, but just an observation. And couple that with what we know and have observed about our student and make that analysis. And then we take it to the next steps. What next steps will you take with your learner? What ideas and resources do you have for teaching that standard, that competency, or that task type? So you can use this as your own personal plan for how you plan instruction. Sounds like thumbs up? We good with that? As you are planning instruction, you can use this flow or checklist, if you will, and ask yourself what you see, what it tells us about the learner, and what next steps you'll take with the student. Today, however, we're just going to focus on the individual skills profile. As you can see, there are many reports, each content standard report, competency report, and task area report. But today we're going to focus on the individual skills profile. This is a sample of the individual skills profile for an ABE student. Again, this is what it would look like for a student. We're going to break it down in just a second. This includes the competencies on the left-hand side. And when I asked earlier how many of you had this report, almost all of you said you had one. This is our student. We know the date they were tested. What else do you notice about this report, just overall? What do you notice about this report? You can post in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and someone answer out loud. That's fine. What do you notice about the individual skills profile? It's well organized. Excellent. Comprehensive levels are different for reading and math. Right. We can't assume that the reading standards are at the same level as the math content, right? Excellent. Strengths and weaknesses of the students. Gives you the percentage that is correct in both the competencies and the standards, as well as the reading tasks, as well as the math tasks. Now, I want to just point out that this N is the number of test items. So I'm going to post that in the chat. If you're trying to interpret your individual skills profile, and again, this is a sample of an ABE student, but the ELP, ELL student individual skills profile is exactly the same, except you'll see the ELP standards on the report, right? For those of you who are looking at an ELP standard or an ELL student. The N stands for the number of questions that were on that specific test form. Now, the test form for this student for math, that was a test form D. The reading test was a level C. Let's take a minute for that to soak in. So when I'm looking at this report, if I see an N of 1, a 2, or 3, I know that there have been a few questions in different task types, in different contexts, that this skill was measured. The meaning from context, let's zoom in for a minute. Meaning from context around vocabulary only had 3 questions. But I do know that their locating details was 13 questions. I can say with confidence, the student is competent at locating details and identifying the main idea, right? Because there are 13 questions in 5. What I can also say is that somebody mentioned weaknesses, that this particular student has 44%, with 9 questions being asked around a higher order reading skill, locating details and inference and drawing conclusions. So these 2 standards are where I can find, where I can target my instruction and find lessons for my students. How does CASAS differentiate vocabulary from context? That's a great question. The task type is very important to understanding the context, right? So if CASAS focuses on the skill standard of locating details, it may be that this, sorry, I'm going to zoom back out here. Whoop, so sorry. My ThinkPad is going crazy here. So sorry about that. Apologies here. Here we go. Let's go back to it. All right. So if I look at my, oh, for goodness sakes. I'm sorry about that. I really do apologize. So the context is going to matter. I'm going to look at our time. The context is going to matter, and the skill standard is measured based on our field studies in multiple contexts to ensure that the test item is not measuring the context and the task type, measuring that vocabulary in that specific context. Simply put, our field study makes sure that when a student is tested, that the standard is isolated and measured in whatever context or task type it is presented. Does that make sense? All right, so let's look a little closer at the individual skills profile. Any questions about this portion of an individual skills profile? I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet. What percentage of student considered competent regarding a task? Betty, I'm going to give you that virtual candy because that's what we're going to look at right now. Excellent. All right. So let me just do the quick summary. These are academic, focusing on these standards. And let's know that there are other types of reports that we're not looking at today. So thanks, Betty. That was a perfect segue. How did you know? How should programs use the report? Well, here's our student, Juan. Juan is said, somebody told me that I have to take a test and they're really nervous. So, of course, we are the person that they connect to, right? So we help set the tone for this test by saying something like, we need to know where your strengths are and what areas you can improve. I'm here to help you. Let's take some practice e-tests before you take your test. That would be with that e-test sampler that I showed you earlier. And now, oh, sorry, Jose. I changed it to Jose. So here's Carmen, our teacher, who is preparing perhaps, or tutor, who's preparing Jose to take the test. We want to let him know that there's going to what the test is and that we're going to pre-test him first to see what he knows and is able to do. So here's what we do. Example of what you would do looking. Let me look at the question. Excellent. Kimberly, we can go more into what you would do to find lessons, but that, as I understand it today, was not the focus of the training. Is that right, Dinah? We're going to do that part on the follow-up activity.
Yes, yes.
No, don't apologize at all, Kimberly. We just only had a limited amount of time to focus on how to interpret the results today, but there is an activity that I'm going to share with Laurie and Dinah that you guys are going to do as a professional development session to answer that exact question. Is that right, Dinah? Did I
Yes, we'll
understand?
send that out to everybody like we discussed
Perfect.
yesterday. Yes. And then just as you might already know, we're at about 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yep.
But what I'd like to say is if, of course, anyone has to drop off early, feel free to go ahead and do so. Kristine, I don't want to rush you through any of this content. I'd love to record whatever you'd like to cover. So we'll keep going, of course, with whatever you need to share.
Sure.
But like I said, if anyone needs to drop off, we completely understand. And thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. And they'll have access to this recording as well, right?
Mhm.
So to answer the question, that was a great question. CASAS considers if it's 70% or below that we need to review it at the student's functioning level. If it's above 70%, you would go up and use a lesson that is harder than their functional level. So if, for example, it's a Burlington English lesson, you would use, if this student is at level C, you would want to make sure that you use lessons above level C about retelling key details because they're ready to be pushed in that area. But where can we get that quick gain? Let's take a deeper look. If we take a closer look, how do you know what to do? You'll start with an area like 81% here to build confidence on retelling key details. So this is what we might call like a spiral review with teaching, right? So start with, if this is the first time that Jose walks in to work with you, whether you're virtually or in person, you might want to give them some quick success to boost their confidence around where their strength is. And then the next lesson, you might say, you know what, Jose, we can get some really good practice around vocabulary and main idea. Now, we look at somewhere between 40 to 70% is what we call those bubble scores, right? That's where we can help our students get the quickest gain. If I'm working with a student on inference, this is a higher order skill. This is harder, right? So we want to make sure that in the sequence of teaching, We're helping them build mastery on vocabulary and main idea. And the inference will come up with the others being the foundations that inference is built upon. If we can't identify the main idea of a text, it's really hard to make an inference from the text. We know that from instructional understanding the how to teach a student to read. So we would focus on these purple areas here, 67 or 40%. Vocabulary, and we could do some lessons in main idea. We're probably going to need to do some direct instruction on identifying the main topic. Use some of those lessons that show a student how to break apart the text, to see repeated words in the text. That's really important. If the word schedule is repeated 8 times, then we know that part of the main idea of the text is something about a schedule, right? And we think of the who, what, when, where, and why, the good old who, what, when, where, why, and how. So that would be where we might focus instruction and lessons that we would choose. Why might Carmen, the tutor, approach instruction this way? You can answer the question in the chat. Why is it important that Carmen, the tutor, approaches instruction this way, with boosting confidence with a strength and then building on already knowledge that's already there but needs to be improved? And you can reflect on this on your own paper. You don't have to post it. Yep. Great, Kimberly. Use what they know to make quicker connections to the material. Scaffolding, that's exactly right. Builds on the strengths so the student doesn't get frustrated. Absolutely. And you're using a strength to leverage, right? You're using the strength to dip down and pull that other skill up. Beautiful. So don't forget that not only are we focused on the content standards in the individual skills profile, this is just the display of just the content standards, right? But don't forget that we also want to think about those CASAS competencies. Again, 70%, give them a harder lesson or start with a lesson in one of these areas. You can see the competency areas or domains that are covered in the CASAS competencies here. These are the 5 areas that are measured in the CASAS competencies. Now, we didn't go in depth in that today, right? But they are there. Yes, Lori, thank you for joining us. Any questions about when you're looking at the percentage correct, where we want to focus instruction, and why Carmen would want to approach this, boosting confidence on a strength, and then reviewing those bubble scores from 40 to 67, 40 or 67%. That range, 40 to 70, that's where you can start to build on their strength. 70%, give them a harder lesson. All right. So that wraps up today. Thank you so much for your interaction today and the growth, you know, for all of us together. We've got some great reflection in the chat. What's one thing that you connected to or that you want to know more about? Post that in the chat, because we'll save this chat, right, Dinah?
Yes.
What's
can.
one thing that you connected to, or good adult learning theory? I'm giving you some choices. You can choose to answer one of these questions. Put it in the chat, or you can, the review of scaffolding. Thank you, Carol. That's one thing that you connected to. Anyone else? Okay, we've got interpreting scores for planning new learning, the interpretation rules of thumb. Would like to know how to take student skills profile and specifically where to look to find stuff for CASABA to help them. asking students to reflect or retell. I need to look at sample items. Seeing the test that students was interesting. Great. Looking forward to sequel sessions. Nice. Using the reports more. Thank you, Mary. All right. I just want to wrap up. Oh, thank you, Carol. I'm glad, Kimberly, that you know how to interpret those reports with the N. Great. And Teresa, you've connected to the vocabulary as being the focus of instruction for that lowest level. Absolutely. And like to know more about what lessons to use to help those high frequency words. Burlington English has a whole bunch of lessons that you can search for on high frequency words. And meaning and summarization as a tool. Excellent. You need, Susan. Great. All right. Overwhelmed. That's okay. It happens, right? To all of us every day. I feel something that I'm overwhelmed with, given the population that we serve and the students that we're working with. The big idea here is you talk with others about what your strengths are of your students and where you're going to focus instruction, and just choose one. The ELPs and the CRS are by design. All of the tests are aligned to those standards. Use them to focus instruction. 70% mastery, make it harder. Target 40 or 50% to 70 for quick gains. And just choose one area to focus on. Who can tell me where this lighthouse is in Michigan? Does anybody know? You can post it in the chat if you know, and we'll give you, Dinah will give you
Fort
some.
Gratiot.
Nice. White Point. Is it Fort what?
Gratiot.
Is that in Whitefish Point?
No, that's Port Huron.
Port Huron. Some folk, yeah, nice. It's beautiful, isn't it? There's training online that can help you. And here is a link to a new training that we've done about the Steps and Goals series if you want to learn more. We hold office hours. We happen to have office hours tomorrow. So if you had some questions that you wanted to talk about and you're available tomorrow, you can join us for office hours. And there is a link to that here. Let me see if I can copy that. I can't copy it while I'm presenting, but there is a link, and all you have to do is type in CASAS office hours, and that link will pull up for you. We have great search engine optimization. Anytime you want to join us at office hours, you can come every Friday that we meet. There'll be a team of people there to help. Last but not least, we hold national news and updates webinars. They are critical for people to stay update with the test series, to learn promising practices for instruction. Some of the things that you said you wanted to learn about, we've talked about that at our news and updates webinars. And there's a tiny URL link here for you as well. If you have any further questions, if you need general information, you can contact our help desk. If you're wanting to know more about e-tests, you can email our e-test group. If you want to ask some specific questions about pulling a report, tech support, I know you don't do that, but we do have tech support that is complimentary. You can email me or call me. Here's my direct extension, and that's my email. Keep in mind, I do this all day, every day. So in the morning or in the afternoon is when I can get back to emails, and it might take me 24 to 48 hours, not working hours, but 24 calendar, clock hours to get back to you. Don't be surprised if it takes me a day to get back. Thank you so much. I would like to just ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not helpful at all, 10 being very helpful. How well did this training meet your needs? You can just post in the chat, or you can send it to me privately, whatever you're most comfortable with. 1, not helpful at all. 10, very helpful. Excellent. Okay, great. Oh, you're welcome. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much for all that you do. I thank you on behalf of your students. I thank you on behalf of CASAS and the Literacy Council for inviting us here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This was very helpful, very valuable. We have recorded it, so we will be sharing it with all of you that attended, but as well with the rest of our tutors that are also interested, but were unable to join us at this time. And as Kristine said, feel free to message her if you have any questions, but also feel free to message us as well. Sometimes those questions help us serve you a little bit better as well. So thank you so much, Kristine. And if anyone needs to hang back to ask any further questions, we can hang back for a few minutes. Kristine, I'm not sure if you have to take off, but if you do, certainly let me know. But thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Dinah.